Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin, Contemporary Issues of Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to talk about the burning issue of the day, and that is what's on the news every day, in and out, all the time. Will Russia invade Ukraine? The short answer is no. But I think there's a lot of things that are going on that are not covered in your mainstream media, and that is the purpose of this presentation, to try to explain what is going on behind the scenes, what is the real position of Russia and President Putin, and what is not being covered in the main media. Well, what you see in the main media is Russia is going to invade. Ukraine is surrounded by Russian troops. Russian troops are amassing on the Ukrainian border. This is true, but this is not even half the truth of what is really going on. What is going on is a hysteric reaction of the Western world, specifically of President Biden and the British, to the Russian proposals on security guarantees, which is the main purpose was the demand that NATO does not expand into Ukraine. And as I said in many other videos, this is unacceptable to all political parties and to Russian public opinion generally, because Ukraine is for many a part of Russia. Ukraine has been a part of Russia for 400 years, and even the Russians were willing to tolerate its independence and cooperating with it on many issues, but it certainly cannot accept its being part of NATO or having some kind of bilateral agreement with the United States with stationing of American missiles that are targeting Moscow. So this is a no-go. This is beyond any negotiations. This must be accepted. If not, Putin said, then there will be military measures. Now, all of that is outside the coverage. The whole coverage of the West is, will Russia invade Ukraine? The answer is no. It is not about Ukraine. It's not about Ukraine. Russia can live with Ukraine. It's about Ukraine membership in NATO. It's about American presence. Now, the US response to these Russian proposals was double down on war deliveries, focusing exclusively on the danger to Ukraine. And the Russians keep saying, we're not going to invade Ukraine. We're not going to. Now, all of that is ignored. No, the US intelligence says they're going to do any day. Psaki says he's going to invade next day. UK intelligence says Russians have a military plot to replace the leadership. All kinds of nonsense is being. Why are they doing this? The answer is very simple. They don't want to address the key issue, and that is no expansion of NATO into Ukraine, and they want to present Putin as an aggressor. Moreover, there's some opinion that the United States is pushing Ukraine for the war with Russia because that is very, very advantageous to the United States. A foolish policy, but it is advantageous in the sense that it would cut off Europe from Russia. It would be able to impose crippling sanctions on Russia. It would make NATO relevant again. It would solidify US military and strategic control over Europe. And therefore, it's a very small price to pay if half of Ukraine is occupied by the Russians. Then at least the United States would have a solid control over Europe economically and politically. That is why, my dear listeners, this is why Putin is not going to do it. He's not going to play the game to favor US advantages. He is not going to sacrifice all his efforts of two decades of building relations, economic and political and other, with Western Europe in order to sacrifice this for the folly of having a piece of Ukrainian territory. It's good enough to support Donbass militarily. So the Russians are not going to invade, and all this hysteria is just a show in order to manipulate the public opinion to convince that Putin is an aggressor. Now, Putin said that they will employ military technical means if their demands are not met. What exactly can he do? And this is a lot of discussion in Russian media about this. Let me just tell you the most important things. The troops that are moving to supposedly Ukrainian borders are actually not moving to Ukrainian borders. They are moving to Polish borders. The Russians are sending a signal to to Poland, which is one of the feistiest opponents of Russia in Europe, that they're there. There were no Russian troops in Belarus, and now there are. You have pictures of Russian missiles moving to Europe, to Belarus, which is also a signal to the West. If you have missiles targeting us from Poland and Romania, now we are going to have our missiles targeting you from Belarus. The Polish got so scared that yesterday announced they're going to build a wall on the Belarusian border, because now they have a new reality. This is already a Russian response. The new reality is that Russian missiles and Russian troops are facing Polish border. Now the next thing that they're doing is negotiations with Venezuela, Cuba and Nicaragua of military cooperation. Most likely there will be some Russian military presence, which already is to some extent, but maybe even missiles, because American strategy of saying every country has a right to choose its own defenses, well then in that sense Cuba and Venezuela have the right by American logic to have their own military alliances and security arrangements. The next thing that is already going on, and the Russian military escadra of ships is going towards the British and towards North Atlantic with the submarines and with the missiles, supersonic ones. So the United States feels that this is actually a serious country that you don't play around with and make empty threats that can be taken seriously. And the next thing, and that is I think the most important in terms of geopolitical strategic balance of forces. A few days ago there was a visit of Iranian president to Russia, and he had negotiations with Putin. And what is already publicly known, and there's probably a lot more that is not known, is that there are military maneuvers of Russia, China and Iran in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific Ocean. That is probably the most important strategic loss to the United States, because if Russia and Iran cooperate, this is like a big thing to the US, because if you look at the map, Iran is facing the Strait of Hormuz. If it has a military alliance with Russia, then Russia would have access to the Indian Ocean. Then Russia and Iran would be able to shut down the Strait of Hormuz like in 15 minutes, if need be, if there's a serious military confrontation. And without the Russian oil and with the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, Middle Eastern oil, there will be a devastating economic impact on Western Europe. And the next thing I'd like to address is the supposedly united front of Western countries, which American media is just repeating all these propaganda lines of Biden and his, Blinken and stuff like that. We're all united, we're all against Russia. No, nothing of the sort again. If you look at the French press, if you look at the German press, essentially there is no one united Europe at all. President Macron, even a couple of years ago, said that NATO is experiencing cerebral death, which means that its body still exists, but its brain is dead. And it's a useless organization. Don't forget that in just a few months ago, there was a big row in French press, which was known as stab in the back, when the Americans canceled when the Australians canceled the submarine order. The French were very upset at the United States, and that France was sided, that it was not taken into account. There's a huge public opinion outcry in France against the United States over the submarine issue. So now there's no love shared much between the two right now. So France is the Normandy format negotiations with Russia and Ukraine. Germany, Scholz made it very clear that Germany, even in case of Russian so-called aggression against Ukraine, will not agree to excluding Russia from SWIFT, that this would be a devastating blow to European economy and to the banking system. And moreover, he said, he just politely asked Biden that the energy sector be excluded from the sanctions imposed on Russia in case of Russian aggression against Ukraine. In other words, the Germans want to continue to have their gas as no alternative. There's no way, if Russian gas flow and oil is shut off, there's absolutely no other way. There are not enough terminals to bring liquefied gas from Qatar or from United States. There's absolutely no alternative. The Germans don't want to have a fight, economic or military, with Russia over the privilege of having Ukraine in NATO. And this is why Russia has a winning position over here. Because the question that the Europeans have to ask themselves: do we want to lose hundreds of billions of dollars? Do you want to be completely dependent on the United States? Do you want to completely ruin the economic stability that now exists? For what? So that Ukraine can join NATO. That's absurd. I mean, nobody in his right mind would be for something like this. And this is what Lavrov is pushing now. He says, we have nothing against Ukraine independent existence. We just don't want NATO troops in there. That is the main point that he is probably going to prevail. Now, and the last point is about the Ukrainians themselves. They've been actually at first very happy that the United States is backing them, that as they say, the whole world is backing them against Russian aggression. But when it turns out that there isn't going to be any Russian aggression, and that if there is, they are the ones who are going to lose half the country, this is when they kind of begin having second thoughts. And Zelensky started saying in the last few days, oh, you know, Russian concentration of troops is not that bad. We've lived with this before. They understood that what Americans want to do, what Biden and the hotheads around him want to do, is sacrifice half of Ukraine for the benefit of proclaiming Putin as an aggressor and then solidifying NATO. In other words, Ukrainians understood that they're a sacrificial lamb and they don't want to be a sacrificial lamb. So now they're beginning to, opening up to seeking a solution with Russia and negotiating and so forth. Besides that, of course, if there's any kind of a military action, they're going to lose $3 billion a year in transit fees of gas. They're not going to get any. Their economy is going to collapse even more than it is already collapsing. In other words, Putin is playing a very interesting game, and I think in the big picture, if we look at the big picture, the United States is conducting an absolutely suicidal policy. It's the policy of antagonizing China, Iran, and Russia at the same time, which brings them together, which makes an absolutely unbelievable new political situation that can challenge the United States in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, and in Europe. And Europe is divided into two blocks now. There's France, Germany, Italy, Croatia, which said it would pull off out of NATO if there is a war with Russia. Sympathetic to that, to Russia, is Hungary and Slovakia, and Spain, and these are the big countries that really make a huge impact. And then there are feisty anti-Russian ones, which is Poland, and then Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, three countries with a population of 8 million people versus Germany with a population of 80 million people. In other words, Europe looks like they're very angry, but all of that is just behind the scenes. In fact, Europe does not want conflict with Russia. Europe is more inclined to find a political accommodation, even if it means not including Ukraine in NATO. In other words, my dear friends, it seems like Putin is winning this diplomatic game, and it seems like Biden is leading an absolutely ridiculous and hopefully not suicidal policy vis-a-vis Russia and China. Thank you.